while I wait for my computer to load. I really love this novel. It was actually the very first piece of literature, like real literature, that I fell in love with. I was in middle school, and it was the first time I really thought about books in like a different way and just thought a literary novel was great. So it's a very sentimental book for me. I have a copy that looks like this that I read. It's tattered and annotated and old. And so we're just going to sort of talk about it. I want to look at education in the novel and sort of refresh our conversation we had in class Monday about John Dewey, and then look at another text that sort of elaborates on the education system and Miss Caroline specifically in the novel. Okay, so we have this quote. We talked about it in class, but it says, "Our teacher says Miss Caroline's introducing a new way of teaching." I'm just trying to tell you the new way they're teaching the first grade, the Dewey Decimal System. And this is Jem talking to Scout about what he's heard at school, essentially. And we discussed at school, sorry, y'all. We discussed in class that, the Dewey Decimal System is what they use in libraries. And so, this is an old card catalog, and you would be given a number, and you go look it up in the card catalog, or you look it up in the card catalog, and then you go find it in the stacks and all that good stuff. But it's more likely that Jim is actually talking about and referring to John Dewey, an educational philosopher. So let's look a little bit. We talked in class about him, but let's look at some resources that can sort of give us some more information about him. So first of all, I just sort of outlined some of his beliefs on education, and I have two links here. One is from a sort of teachery website called Teach Thought. It's very accessible. And then Stanford also has this really long reference PDF it's a web page, but anyway, where they really talk a lot about John Dewey and all of the things that he believed and his publications and all that good stuff. So I'll pull that up in just a second and we'll look at it. All right, so after sort of looking through both of those documents, I pulled out these two core beliefs he had on education. So number one, kids need to be active in their education. So teachers shouldn't be just standing up in front of the class preaching for an hour and a half. Instead, the kids need to be active. This is kind of where project-based learning came into play, right? We want our students to be trying to discover and question-based learning, and all of those really modern sort of ideas stem from this idea that students need to be active in their education, not passive. Okay, and then also the most effective education is connected and relevant. So we sort of talked about this in class, but nothing should be taught in isolation. Instead, we need to sort of try to connect those dots for students, and that'll help them understand more better. I'm laughing and joking. I know that's bad English. All right, so let's just take a second and look at these resources. These are clickable. So you just click on it. And hopefully your internet is working more quickly than mine. Do 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 do. Okay, so now it's finally loaded. And you can sort of see, this is a teacher website, right? It's got social media, they have a podcast, all this good stuff. And essentially what it does is it really breaks down some of the core beliefs of Dewey and what he believed. And so it's just 3 short paragraphs. It's a very short rundown. It has a reference talking directly taking it directly from Dewey, right? And so, I mean, that's a good quick guide if you want to sort of look at what Dewey believed. All right, and then we have the Stanford text, which this one's a little less accessible. You have to do some digging to find stuff. But it's a good resource, I think. So I'm not saying it's a bad resource. It's just if you need more time to look at it. So first we have this biography. He talks about, they talk all about his life and his beliefs. And then we have this really cool, clicky, linky, I love this stuff. This is where I nerd out and get all excited. But you can click on these links, obviously, and it'll take you to that part of the article. So if you want to know more about Dewey, this is a good resource. I'll be honest, I'm probably not going to look at this much. Maybe a little bit, but not much. It's too much for me. All right, so let's look at the next slide. Okay. And so after looking at sort of the ideals behind Dewey, I found this interesting article. It's called We, John Dewey's Audience of Today. And I was sort of surprised because many of our modern teaching ideas, you know, we talked about over here, have stemmed from this idea of active learning, of interconnectivity, and all this good stuff. But this is actually a really kind of scathing criticism. This article is actually a bit of criticism for Dewey. And essentially it says that democracy in education may be considered optimistic and ambiguous, but also gullible and blind for ignoring the economic and political reality of his time. Essentially, it goes on to just make it look like Dewey's idea of education was based in like this utopia and that it wouldn't really work. And I don't know. I have not yet read the entire article, and I'm sure it makes some really good points, but I feel like it's a little too scathing. I think John Dewey's ideas, I mean, they have thrived into the 21st century, so I feel like they have much validity and are research-based and all this good stuff. So I don't know about this article, but it's interesting to see the different perspective. And also it was fun to put the little gifs of like bad teachers. And you could also think about, you know, distance learning. How does Dewey's ideas, how do those fit in? I mean, he wouldn't have been able to know that, right? That this was going to happen, but how would his ideas sort of hold up in our complete chaos of the 21st century, 2020 classroom? So it's something to think about when you look at Dewey. All right. And now we've got this interesting article. It's about Miss Caroline. So I got this picture. It's just from the film. I know it's grainy, but it's kind of, I thought it was actually just going to be more about education, but it focuses a lot on Miss Caroline, which is interesting because I'm kind of floating the idea in my head, working on my paper being about Miss Caroline, so it works out for me. But this article gives a lot of information. I'm going to pull it up in just a second. Gives a lot of information about the criticism of Miss Caroline, and then it comes back and gives some, not really praise, but defends her a little bit. It's an interesting read if you're curious about this teacher and how it works. But one quote I thought was particularly interesting. It says, Lee never used the term progressive education. And then it says, Jim introduces the concept when he explained that Miss Caroline had learned the new way of teaching in college, which I think is very interesting. You know, we're in the 1930s and this person comes, she's fresh out of college, and suddenly she's infusing all these new ideas into her school. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? Progressive education was not a particularly modern educational theory in 1932, and it goes on to talk a little bit more about that. So let's take a look at the actual article. It's Light and Columbia from Lee University, wherever that is. And oh, my computer's acting weird, y'all. Sorry. We have this introduction. She describes sort of what goes on, the composition of the class. You know that we have town kids, we have bus kids, we have town kids. We have this criticism of Miss Caroline, the defense of Miss Caroline. You know, I mean, you can see there's a lot of headings, a lot of things going on here. As interesting as I think this could have been, and as much as I plan on using it and like perusing it, I do have one criticism of this article though. And this is just from my limited perspective, but for a scholarly article, it is the writing is not what I would expect of an academic journal. I mean, it is from, hold on, let me see where it was published. Where's my publisher? I do know how to use this. Cite. Yeah, we could find it in the citation. Well, my computer's not doing the thing. It's fine. It is a scholarly article. Oh, there it is. Okay. So it was published in Education. Wonder what that is. I'll have to look that up later. But it has to be some sort of scholarly article because EBSCO is our source, right? And so I was sort of shocked by the writing. And if you choose to read this article, you'll probably see what I mean. It just feels less academic in nature, less eloquent. Nonetheless, it's an interesting... It's interesting, and I think it's worth, if you want to look at education, I think this article is worth your time. All right, y'all, I hope this has given you some ideas for how you want to use education in To Kill a Mockingbird. I know I just kind of dumped a bunch of resources on you, but I think some of them are pretty good. Have a great night, and I'll see y'all next Monday.